Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Oscar nominee Brett Morgen, who directed Moonage Daydream, a cinematic odyssey exploring David Bowie's creative and musical journey. Brett, this is such a complex, beautiful, ambitious film. What made you decide to take on a David Bowie documentary?
Well, I was interested in doing a non-biographical portrait of an artist. Um, Something that sort of got to the core without sort of typical, a different way to access the essence of someone. And David really lent himself as an artist to this sort of endeavor.
And you had met David in your life, not about this project, but did that weigh into how you portrayed him at all? Or what's your most interesting David Bowie story?
Well, it did, in the sense that once I started getting into the research and reflecting back on my meeting at him in 2007, one of the things that is, I would say, just entirely unique about David, having viewed every piece of media that he was participated in over the course of 50 years, is he was always present.
Mm.
And I associate that with his appreciation for life, with this under the idea that never waste a moment. That you and I may have 15 minutes to talk to each other, but this is an opportunity for an exchange, for growth for one of us. You may reference a book that I wasn't aware of. I may do the same to you, and we can leave this conversation, with some. And I think David understood that, and he understood that from a very young age. The first week I was on the job, Tony Vistani brought me into the studio to play me some raw audio tracks from a song called Signet Committee, which David recorded when he was 22 in 1969, I think. And the crescendo of the song, David sings out, "I want to live, I want to live, I want to live." And Tony ISO David's vocals, and I could hear him sobbing as he was singing this.
Mm.
And it was the sounds of a man who knew he had very little time, but he was only at the beginning of his journey. So I think that all kind of resonated wildly. And of course, you might have heard the story that while I was prepping the film, I had a heart attack and was in a coma. So coming out of that experience to then write this script, with filled with David's kind of appreciation and zest for life, was an opportunity to do a film that's not a music biodoc as we think of it, but a film that's really a celebration of life and art and creativity, and a sort of roadmap on how to lead a very fulfilling and creatively successful life.
And it's the first Bowie film officially authorized by his estate. So what was your relationship there, and what made them trust you to have this film in your hands?
Well, the gentlemen who've been entrusted with David's estate are his executors, who were his accountants. And I don't think, they were with David for 30 plus years. They had plenty of time to prepare for what actions would happen after David passed. And I think the one thing that made this work really well was that I believe David had told his executors that he wasn't really a fan of talking head documentaries, where experts who weren't really a part of the experience end up owning the history. And so I think that resonated with my approach to the film, which was not to include talking heads. And I also think that they understood that this was an artistic endeavor, not a corporate endeavor. First thing they said to me is, "This isn't Bowie on Bowie, it's Morgen on Bowie, and you need to embrace that." They presented me with Final Cut, never asked for any creative input whatsoever. So this idea of authorized is really kind of misleading, misnomer. It sort of suggests that they're happy with it. It was authorized web before it was made, or after, or whatever it's going to be. They could not have been more supportive, though. I mean, it was, I remember sort of I wasn't sure what they were going to think of the film. And it really, to a certain extent, didn't matter. I don't mean to be whatever, but the film was done. And they've just been unbelievably supportive. They were two men who run the estate, were probably two of the closest people to David throughout his life. And upon seeing the film, they said, you got it, you nailed it. That's the man we know. So.
And part of having their support was the assets that came with it. I think they gave you like 5 million
Yeah, a
things
lot.
to go through or something. That seems overwhelming to me. How do you even begin to comb through that and then kind of figure out what you're doing?
You try your damnedest to get rid of all the duplicates right at the beginning, because there's like dubs of dubs of dubs of dubs of dubs, and I mean literally sometimes 13 different tapes, and you have to go through each one because you may, and this would happen where one of them would contain some extra footage. So it was a bit of a process, but once that was done, the footage was presented in chronological order in the best way that my team and I could sort of associate the dates on it. And that's how I do all my work. I collect all the media I can find on a subject. I organize it chronologically, and then narratives kind of reveal themselves and illuminate themselves that you wouldn't otherwise see if you're looking at it sort of scattered.
And his upbringing was interesting to me. One of the stories that I did enjoy about the film was about his brother. And you talk about that and how his brother sort of influenced his musical taste growing up and then was diagnosed with schizophrenia and put away. And that sort of made David question his own, like, am I an artist or am I going insane? Um, this is a very immersive project. How did you decide which of those biographical pieces to put in?
Well, you could say that's a mistake given my conceit. The idea was, and my treatment for the film, the first line was no dates, no facts, no information, no biography. And but as I'm putting this together, David's stock and trade is alienation and isolation. And he's going to refer to it consistently throughout his journey. And I just, as a viewer, wanted at some point to peel back the onion. So like, what is the root of this? What, and not, you're not going to really get too deep in 3 minutes of, sidetracking, whatever, but the essence of it. And just by distilling it to almost a generic, there was no love in the house, I thought it would invite the audience, many of us who felt that in our own homes, to project. And suddenly we are now being able to identify with David Bowie, an artist who's always been at arm's length. And I agonized over it because I knew it was breaking my own covenant. And the concern was that once you break that, everything is now up. Why didn't you mention this person or that person? Because if you don't mention anyone, then it kind of is a little more clear what the conceit is. But I would say that honestly, that at the end of the day, and I would agonize over this. I came to a belief that David presented to me, which is that there's no mistakes in art. There's just happy accidents. And if you accept that, then, what I was, by placing that biographical information there, it felt right. It might have been wrong in terms of some dogmatic thing that was in my head, but it's just like, okay, so it's fun. It's wrong, but it worked. So that, same with like a lot of discussion about some of the repetitive imagery. And I could articulate, quite a bit probably for the duration of this call, why it's there. And half of what I would say only came to me after the fact, to be honest. But I do know that at the final moment where I was trying to like decide what stays and what goes, I was like, okay, I know I should take these out, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
I like it. I like the resonance. I like how it builds upon your last. I like how life's not linear. I like that it's, there's so many aspects to those kind of recurring images, that worked for me. But also acknowledging that it's fallible.
Well, and I want to talk about the editing a little bit because to me that's just insane. There's so much footage that it moves so fast that the colors, the concert footage, he's in a car, he's on an interview, he's painting. It's almost like this kaleidoscope of imagery that we're immersed in. Talk about how do you even begin to sort of walk me through how you edit?
Mel Brooks, I was so lucky. I went to this high school in Santa Monica called Crossroads. And I remember when I was 11th grade, Mel Brooks came to talk to our 20 film students. And he talked about before he was a comedian, he was a drummer. And the comedy is all about rhythm. And I'm really stuck with me. And I think the editorial approach of this film was jazz. It was improvisation. It was organic. It was not, it was about intuition and feel. I went to the edit with a collection of images that I felt could be used at any given moment. There was all of this media that I had collected that represented all of the art and artists that David was influenced and inspired by throughout his life. And I felt that could go wherever I wanted to. And I thought that that newsreels or any footage of the 20th century, because in a way I was making film about the 20th century, would be apropos. So given that collection of media, I went in and I wrote the playlist was part of the script. So I knew what songs, I knew what scenes I was moving towards. How I would get there, knowing I'm trying to get here, that was the real pain of the film. It'd be like, okay, I know I'm here and I'm going here, but what is the next shot? And the reality is I lay down a track of music first and I start cutting to it and then start feeling for them. So scenes are kind of the length they are. Mainly, it's not like the music editor came in and shifted all this stuff around. I music edited first and then put the picture in to accommodate it. And so that's also gives this sort of sense of synchronicity. Everything is kind of like really kind of moving with the rhythms of the music and the flow of the music. Oftentimes, I couldn't tell you when I started a scene exactly what elements would be in the final version of that scene, which I had been able to do on previous films. This one was a little bit of, I think I'm going to pull from this area. I think this scene will require some kind of anger, references, but it really was just getting in there and like mixing it up.
And you direct, produce, write, and edit. Is it always, do you always like to have that much control over everything, or was that
it's no control?
ambitious?
It's the opposite of control.
Okay.
There's no control. You're totally your control when you have a producer or a studio telling you gotta go home for the day or something. But when you're there were no rules. There was nobody. I had no delivery date. I had a finite amount of money, but because I was editing, I could extend it. I just didn't pay myself as an editor. So if you think about it, once the footage was digitized, we basically had no operating costs for years. It was me and basically a PA off the street and an assistant editor working for home for several years. So I guess it's it can be a problem. There's no glory to it. There's no advantage to it, really. I mean, maybe a little bit, but it's a hindrance. The biggest problem ultimately, and by the way, this sort of happened because of, in part, financial issues, that the film was budgeted for 18 months and went on for 7 years. And I just couldn't pay anyone to do anything. And nobody was giving me more money. So I was stuck with a contract having to deliver a film with no overages allowed and no contingency and no production company fee. That was supposed to be an 18-month endeavor for 7 years. The only way to do it was to absorb all of these roles myself. That was it. I couldn't hire anybody other than this one kid who had zero experience in any aspect, never worked in film in his life. So I could afford to pay him very little, like an entry wage. And then he had to learn how to post, soup, line, produce everything. It was a two-person operation. The problem really is that, there's nobody there was nobody to consult with, or to say, should I do this or this? And that ended up causing me to waste a lot of time, where I would 15 days into editing a scene, I'm like, oh yeah, I should put that there. And it was like, oh, why didn't I think of that? If someone was here, they would have said, you're heading to a cul-de-sac. So, and then, there, I guess there's a certain bit of martyrdom of oh, I'm going to figure it out on my own. Like nobody could, I'm going to have to get out of this mess. I got myself in here. I can get myself out of here. And, it was only pleasant when I got to sound and color. Up to that, it was not pleasant.
We're an awards website, so I want to just flash back a little bit to what it was like when you were nominated for an Oscar for On the Ropes. What do you remember about that experience?
Well, there was no experience back then. You got to understand, in 1999, I was living in New York, and I did not participate in a single function other than docu-days at the IDA 3 days before the ceremony. I did not do any interviews. I did not have a single industry screening. There was nothing up until we showed up at the ceremony, the luncheon, the docu-days 3 days before, and the ceremony. And guess what? Very little money was spent.
Yeah.
And I didn't lose any time. I got to start making the kid stays in the picture. I got a whole, I was halfway into the movie. Now I see what happens with award season. It's like, how many great movies we're not seeing because great filmmakers spend 6 months to a year traveling around talking about the same. It's just, it was so different, man. It was really, you couldn't buy an Oscar. There was no campaign. The year that I was in was really controversial. It was One Day in September won. Great movie, deservedly. I wish I could have seen it before the ceremony, but nobody was able to see the movie before the ceremony. Arthur Cohen, who had already won 5 Oscars, who basically had a monopoly on the doc branch at that point. There wasn't a doc branch. It was whoever showed up. And that year, or the way it worked was you had to declare and write in signature where you saw all 5 films. And Arthur's film was not available as a screener and was not in theaters. He four-walled it. So the only way you could vote that year was if you showed up at the one official Academy screening that took place on a weekday at 2:00. It was the same year Buena Vista was in. So everyone thought, oh, Buena Vista is going to win most popular film of the year. There were only about 23 people who could vote on the Oscar for Best Documentary that year.
It's a weird system. And then just the last question: David Bowie, Jane Goodall, Robert Evans, Kurt Cobain. These are a few of your subjects. It's an interesting collection. How do you decide who you want to explore in this documentary art form?
Well, what opportunities are there with the canvas? With Jane, there was this amazing collection of archival film. With Bowie, it was, his art. Kurt, I had access. I make films about people who essentially live life on their terms, who do extraordinary things, who are driven, and who inspire me. And I look for inspiration in my subjects. They motivate me. They're at this station that I'm at. I've been very blessed that even with Kurt, to find a subject who I think could connect and inspire audiences even through his pain, which is what he did when he was alive. And with Jane, what an incredible empowerment story for everyone. And same with Bowie. I mean, Bowie is it's really like a G-rated film. It's for all audiences. So I honestly, it comes down to like getting inspired and really the canvas. You know, I'm always thinking of that. What I was talking to, I'm producing my first film for another director, and I was on the phone with him the other day, and he said, you know, I want to go big theatrical like Moonage on this, and I said, you know, what are you going to do with to warrant that? You know, is there some reason this needs to be in cinemas? The sound, are we doing something with the sound? Because my understanding of this picture is it's not that, and therefore it's fine for streaming. And I don't know how I got on that tangent. Anyway, it's all good. It's been no, I guess the tangent was the subject really kind of dictates the form to a certain extent. And
Okay.
some subjects come to me and go, hey, that is awesome. That really should be a book. You know, there's no footage and there's nobody left to tell the story. And so why are you trying to do that as a documentary? I had a guy recently approach me and said, you know, Jimi Hendrix came and played my small town in 1970 and I want to make a documentary about it. I'm like, is there footage? He's like, no. I was like, is there audio recordings? He goes, no. I was like, why would you make a film? Like, what's the film? You're gonna like, unless you're I don't. Why wouldn't that be a book? You go interview everyone, and why does that have to be in the? So I think it's important to sort of use the medium you're working in. You know, Picasso's sometimes I'm not referring to myself Picasso. The idea of sometimes ceramics, sometimes it's painting, sometimes you know you choose the medium, you choose the genre that best suits the the story.
Well, thanks for sitting down and chatting with us today about Moonage Daydream and all the other fascinating stories. It's currently streaming on Max. Some lucky few had the chance to see it on IMAX when it first came out. They can now still see it on Max. It's simply called Max now. And Brett Morgen, congratulations and best of luck at the upcoming Emmys. And thanks for sitting down with Gold Derby today.